You think an actor is queer baiting? Really? Well, okay. Well, here. Do you really know what queer baiting is? I don't want to seem, rude to gaslight you or anything, but let me explain the difference. Cuz first of all, queer baiting isn't something that a person can do. It is, queer baiting is done by producers, it's done by networks in an attempt to bait queer audiences into watching their show by making it seem like there's going to be a queer relationship or seeming to hint at it in previews while never actually intending to go through with that, even so far as to not really even giving those characters a relationship in the first place, platonic or otherwise. But on the other hand, and while queer baiting is a problem and it is rampant, it has gotten less to be a problem in the past few years, honestly. Um, you can check my blog, honestly, about it. It's what the whole thing's about. I mean, gay stuff, I guess, right? But queer coding, honestly, I'm quite fond of it. Not a lot of people really seem to understand what queer coding really is. But queer coding is when, a show, intentionally adds subtext like behavioral and visual cues that to a queer audience, or, in other cases, there's neurodivergent coding. Like autism coding is actually a lot more common than you would think. Like in robotic or alien characters, it's actually really common, which is not great stereotypes, but it happens. But like it's like that where there's behavioral visual cues that could signal to a queer audience that a character is queer without outright stating it, and that can go deeper in the way that characters can have a really deep and close relationship that's never stated to be romantic, but it can be more implied. Like, in my opinion, something doesn't have to be explicitly stated for it to exist within the canon of a show. Like, a character can be queer without them ever having to, like, come out of the closet about it, you know? So, and I feel like that's kind of a hot take, but this is just my opinion. I don't know if that's the actual definition of any of this stuff. Let's talk about it, Like, queer coding happens when there's risks of being censored. Like, there is a Chinese novel that I really like, Mo Dao Shi. I'm pronouncing that wrong for sure, but it has a live TV adaptation called The Untamed. It's on Netflix. It's about 50 episodes. It's really really good. And in it, the two characters that are in an explicit relationship within the book are in an implied coded relationship within the show due to, China not being too fond of the gays um, for some reason. And it's stuff like that, like, and there's other things like Sherlock, for example, that are a lot more bait from what I understand, from what I've seen. I never actually watched the show, but it seems as though there are characters that had chemistry that um, like were explicitly not intended to be romantically um, construed. I feel the same about Riverdale. I think Riverdale in the first season, Betty and Veronica had some queer baiting going on, even though they do have gay characters later on. It still feels very, very bait to me. The whole show feels like queer bait, and I don't know how to describe it better than that. Stranger Things, there's a lot of characters that people talk about within Stranger Things, but I think Will Byers is coded. I think Will Byers is one of our best examples of a queer coded character. Um, Whereas there's people like Billy and Eddie Munson who are not really queer coded. I think um, Billy is racist, so don't headcanon him as anything other than that because he's kind of an awful person, within the within the show. He's awful. And then Eddie, he's just a guy. He's just a 20-year-old who's still in high school. And I know, the Eddie Muncification, the, people are like, he's just a little gay because he has the handkerchief coming out of his pocket, but like, I feel like that's just the style of the 80s. I don't think he's queer. I think it's okay that he's just a nerd. From what I understand, there's some more queer bait examples coming from, again, the CW. So I'm seeing a recurring problem here with the CW not wanting to actually deal with their queer characters. It started back with Supernatural, where, in my opinion, very coded. But they have a trend where they just kill off their gays, or they pretend to have them when they don't actually have them. So I think it's a CW problem more than anything else, and it's also a Marvel problem. I think because people, we've heard tell of Falcon and the Winter Soldier having queer bait, and it's just played for laughs. Um, that's really that's really it. Is just figuring out that queer bait is not something a person can do. It is something done by a network as a marketing tool. You can't queer bait if you're a person. Okay? That's not how it works. It doesn't matter how you perceive them. People cannot queer bait. And then queer coding is making a character queer without explicitly stating it. Mostly, sometimes due to censorship or sometimes just because, it doesn't fit the character to have a coming out scene, and that's okay. Like, it's okay for a character to just be queer and not have it be like a big deal. I think that's something we need to get to, as like as a group of people, as a society. We live in a society. Ugh. I'm the Joker. But we need to get to a place where we can just be okay with characters being queer without it being, a whole arc for them. Like, a character can just exist and not have it be discussed that, like, oh, like, I'm bisexual, and that's like part of the character, and like, yeah, it's part of people's identity, but it doesn't need to be like part of a story to be part of a character, if that makes sense. Like, it can just be there. um I think that's all I have to say. Like, just do your research. Like, don't get all your facts from TikTok, blah 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 blah. Says me, I'm online 24/7, but don't tell people that they are queer baiting. They are just existing.